Everybody ready? Everybody ready? Let's see. It is... What day is it today? It must be the 3rd, right? Okay. All my audio working here. And... yeah, looks good. Okay, welcome everybody to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and we are going to make another one of my favorite artworks. Of course, as I always say, they're all my favorite artworks, and that's the fun thing about running a class like this, is I get to make up some of the rules. Although I am interested to know what paintings you'd like to know how to paint, so you can certainly leave those comments in the chat below or to the side or wherever it is today. So we are going to do something a little bit different than all of the 24 episodes that have come before this one. And it might appear to be something totally, like depending on what your goals are for painting, it might appear to be something that is totally useless and irrelevant, and you think like, oh, this is just stuff that maybe graffiti artists would use and it has no use at all. But you'd actually be surprised how often stencils are used in art. I mean, particularly contemporary art, but there are examples in art history of stencils having been used. And before I even get into the whole stencil use, we are going to make a painting that doesn't involve stencils, no scissors or extra paper or anything else. So I'll show you how to make the basic painting, then I'm going to show you how to make a stencil, and then I'm going to show you how to use just the regular paint that we have, and then I'm going to do another version that shows you how to use spray paint. So let me see. Maybe right off the top, what I'm going to show you is a video I shot literally 15 minutes ago with my wife before she took our daughter to her very first appointment with a nanny. Our daughter's never been by herself until this very moment today, and so that's a big step for her, but also for us. So I feel it's a little bit in the back of my mind, a little anxiety of like, oh, our daughter's off in her own world right now. Anyway, so let's look at Banksy maybe first, because he's the artist we're going to be talking about. And okay, so let's bring Banksy up here on the screen. So I think one of the most interesting things about Banksy is his anonymity. We don't know who he is exactly. There are some theories as to who he is, and some people believe the case has been settled and we know who he is, but there are some other people that believe it could be other people. But who he is perhaps maybe irrelevant. I think part of even if we did know who it was, I don't know if that would really change the art all of that much. But it is interesting that he's probably the most well-known, widely recognized just name in art, in contemporary art. You could go to a grocery store and talk to random people, and I bet you 9 out of 10 have at least heard the name Banksy before. Whether they would be able to identify his art or her art, we're not exactly sure who it is, or they, right? If we want to use a gender-neutral pronoun. So we're not exactly sure who they are, but you know, the pretty much everybody has heard that name, which is very rare for contemporary art when you really think about it. You know, a lot of the artists that we've talked about, many of them are alive, and I'm sure even those of you who are interested in art are hearing their names for the first time, whereas Banksy, like, I've heard that name before. So Banksy became originally well known as a graffiti artist, and still does some graffiti, but has since kind of evolved to do all sorts of multimedia. He's a now film director. There's a movie, maybe we'll see as we'll go through here that maybe there's a. So here's some of his early works. These very well known for these stencils. There's a whole movie I saw at the Vancouver Film Festival about this exact thing, and because often what happens is these murals are made and they're on somebody's wall, and the person realizes, oh, this wall is all of a sudden worth like $50 million or $10 million, and I could make a lot of money. And so there's a movie all about the extraction of this wall off of a building in Bethlehem and smuggling it out of the country, and it really kind of, it's a fascinating story. I can't remember the name of it offhand. Let me see, I'm just going to scroll right down here. I know how exciting it is to watch somebody scroll through. So this is a really great documentary, or mockumentary, or a fiction, like this is I believe he directed this movie, or he, she, they directed Exit Through the Gift Shop. Highly recommended. To be honest, I am not a fan of graffiti. Never been a particular big fan of graffiti, but I always try to watch any art-related movie anyway, just because I'm being an art teacher. I think it's important for me to kind of know what is going on in the world in terms of art. And I actually watched it, and it gave me a whole new respect, or not new, but a respect for graffiti art. Again, I'm not totally into the idea of vandalizing, but I think what is interesting about his work is, a lot of graffiti is just people scrawling their name all over a wall and then running away. His at least has an image that often makes us think, and really that's a lot of what art is, right? And they're often very political in nature, questioning authority, and he goes to some extraordinary lengths, often putting himself at risk to make some of these images. And the fact that he hasn't been arrested, or at least that I don't know of, is really remarkable. I mean, even if I'm sure police officers are like, I don't have no idea how this person gets away with all this stuff. Let me just scroll down here. Another thing that was, if you may have heard of recently, was this Dismal Land, which was a Disney knockoff theme park that was built. And where was that? In the UK somewhere. And he invited a bunch of other artists to collaborate and to make these immersive environments and sculptures. He also ran a hotel in Palestine that I think it was just a pop-up thing. I don't know if it's still there. Is it still there? Maybe the Waldorf Hotel. There is he did a residency here. I'm looking at this residency in New York, and there was another movie. I think it's called Banksy Does New York, that is actually really good. That is what's, I think, if anything else, if you're not a fan of graffiti art, and I imagine probably most people watching this aren't, but that residency or as he calls it, in New York, that he did in 2018 is really, really good. The documentary of it, because he made a new artwork every single day throughout New York, and there are all sorts of crazy things that he did that clearly took years and years of planning to pull off. So every single day there was a new crazy thing happening around New York, and like the press running around, and so Banksy Does New York is another great movie that you should watch. And you don't have to be a fan of art, really. I found it really inspiring, because it's like, this is a very creative person. Clearly is transcending the graffiti world into high fine art, and even beyond fine art into pop culture, and into our regular conversation. Like the fact that we're talking about him right now, there's millions of graffiti artists out there, but the fact that Banksy is the most famous of all of them and the most famous visual artist of all is kind of says enough, right? So let's just kind of take a look at, here's just some images of his work. There's a few, like the balloon girl, and I don't technically know the name of some of these. I think what's, again, is interesting is because of his anonymity, people have ascribed names to him. Now, technically, this is his website, and this website has often had images on it, and you have been able to click around. I don't know, it seems sort of now there's just a placeholder image on there currently, and again, by the time you watch this video, you know, let's say a year from now, this could look very different. There is another website, and I don't know who this, well, I was gonna say, I don't know who created it. Here's their names at the bottom. I don't think this is maintained by Banksy or his, her, they's, you know, whoever represents him or collaborates or works with him. But it does, this is the work that we're going to be talking about today, or that we're going to be making. And it does, there's other kinds of things. And, but again, how he makes his money is kind of interesting, because he's making these public art that, and other people are making a lot of money off of them, off of Banksy. So I believe that the way that Banksy makes money is through the selling of some prints through a few select art galleries around the world. And yeah, I mean, it would be really interesting to one day, when we find out who Banksy is understanding the whole business behind Banksy. Because I'm sure there's, yeah, anyway, we can go on and on. So here is the image, Flying Balloon Girl, as it's come to be known, made in 2005 in, it was, now again, can't remember if this is in Palestine. Let's just kind of go back. It was on a wall in the West Bank in Israel. So I know it was done a few times, because if you look this image up on the internet, in fact, let's do it right now, you'll see that there's a number of different images, right? So there's this version, right? And you could see, here's a photograph with this woman walking in front of it, and just sort of notice the way that the balloons are, and how it crosses over here. Again, here's that same image, I think just cropped slightly differently. Now this, I think, is just somebody making some money making prints off of it. But here's another version, and I wonder if this is on the other side of that wall, right? Here's another one here. And you know, there are people that do fake Banksies, right? I think that's also part of this whole thing, is that there are people that are taking the artwork and making new stencils based on them, spray painting them elsewhere. So I mean, it's a kind of fascinating example of kind of how the art world works, and how fraud works in the art world, how people make money in the art world. Okay, so where was I going to go here? Let's get that image back up here. So this is the version, anyway, that we're going to do with some red balloons. And I was outside spray painting. Do I want to show you this right now? I think I do. Yeah, let's show you, because we're going to remake this. And this has now been about half an hour since I did this. It's still a little bit wet, and boy, does it stink. Woo! I am, I should be taking some Tylenol or something, because I'm going to get a bit of a headache, I think, by the end of today. But let's just sort of show you what, this is ultimately what I created. And this is the spray paint version, and I'll show you how to make this as we go here. But this is ultimately what the image that resulted from this. Now, I was in a bit of a hurry, so maybe I'll play the video showing me spray painting this. So this is a little bit sloppy, but the great thing with a stencil is I can take this, you can still see it's still wet? Actually, this is now dry, so we could make another version of this today. But the great thing with the stencil is that you can make infinite copies of it. You'll also see that I've taped this down here just to help keep the alignment of these images together. So I have these two stencils. Here was the balloons, and here was the girl holding the balloons, right? So we'll get to this in a second. Again, so how about, let me just play this video right off the top, and let me see, where is it? And I'll talk over it while it's... Okay, so here's me outside, laying down. So this is like a sawhorse that I use for building things. And oh, that's the iPhone. It looks a little bit blue. You can see there's the dollar canvas that I've got, and then the two templates over top of it, and I've taped them. And I'll show you how to do all of this as we go forward. But there they are. And the reason also I did this outside is, again, this is really, really stinky, the smell of that paint. And also, I wanted to do this beforehand while there was some light. If I did this after or at the end of today's episode, it would be pitch black outside. You'll see I'm putting on some surgical gloves or latex gloves, because that spray paint often oversprays and gets all over the place, and it's helpful to have some gloves so that you don't have to worry about scrubbing your hands for 10 minutes afterwards trying to get all this stuff off. Okay, you see I shake the can up really well, and then I do a couple of tests just to make sure that the paint is spraying out. And then you'll see I'm holding the can, or the paper down, so that I try to get as clean of a spray as possible. Now, I can see right now, looking at this footage, how a little bit of it went up and under the stencil. So that's also just I was being a little bit rushed here. And you can see right in this area where it went a little bit wider than expected. Now, it's also very, very wet at this point. So, ideally what you would do is you would spray it, go have a hamburger, go do something else, and then come back and then spray the next layer on top of it. If you have a two-part stencil, which is what we're doing right now. So, you'll see... I decide to just go right ahead anyway and do it, and you'll see the result that happens, because it does take a little bit of the black paint that was still wet and soaks it up on the back side of the balloon stencil. And also what's interesting here, what happened is after I did the spray, I realized that my stencil wasn't lining up as well as it originally had. So I end up here actually tearing the stencil off. So my carefully thought out plan has been, I'm now moving it around, because these are supposed to be the strings for the balloon, and ideally they're hidden by the balloons. So I realized, oh, I need to move it around, otherwise some of it's not going to be there properly. And then look, you see me spray, and then, oh, they're still really showing through. Now again, I should have, if I had more time, sprayed it and left it and just moved on. But I was in a bit of a hurry, so I just went and sprayed a number of coats on it, which is why it's probably still to this point still wet. And again, I'm showing there how there's some of the paint that's stuck on the back of the stencil that peeled off of the black of the girl's body there and her legs. So, okay. So let me just close that. Let's just quit time. Okay. So, again, let's bring this version here. So you'll see this is the result half an hour later, and I'm just trying to see. It looks like it's possibly this area is still a little bit wet, and then you can see here's where some of the paint came off. Now, having said everything, one of the reasons why I actually went out and got spray paint just to do this piece today is because I actually really do like some of this overspray here. So I think that's part of using a stencil if you're trying to recreate that authentic graffiti look, that, you know, some of these areas, you know, let's zoom in here. You know, some of these areas where there is a little bit of this overspray actually make it look maybe a little bit more authentic, right? That it just seems to have a little, like, I think in a funny way, if this was done really, really perfectly, it could be nice, but it could also just seem a little bit too clinical, antiseptic, or and it just doesn't, it is sort of antithetical to the whole idea of graffiti being a little bit messy and raw. Okay, so again, I'm going to show you how to make all of this stencil here in a couple seconds, or not a couple seconds, and over the next hour or so. But here's sort of where we eventually get to. So a little bit of a different way of running today's class. I'll also just kind of show you, here is some of the other elements here. So here's the what was cut out of the stencil. And you could potentially use these to actually glue down or hold down and then paint around the image. That could be a kind of a fun way of reusing these. And then here was just, I printed out of our photo, or not, our inkjet printer, these on just regular, you know, lined paper. And I'll show you where that stencil is here in a moment. All right, so there's two separate stencils. In fact, let's bring up so at the very bottom of your screen right now, in the video description, there is a link to a Dropbox folder, and you'll see that there were some templates that I made for Andy Warhol that are here for a few episodes ago, and then here's the one for Banksy. And then in here there are printable JPEGs, and there are printable PDFs. So they're the exact same image, just sometimes some printers may want a PDF versus a JPEG to print from. But you could print those out, and you can print them out onto just, because it doesn't matter what this is. This is just throwaway paper, right? And I'll explain what all this is. If you watched the Warhol episode a few weeks ago, you'll know what all of this means. So we'll start this all over from scratch. So here's the printouts on regular photocopy paper. Okay, and let's get a canvas out. Actually, let's get a few of these canvases. We've got all of our art supplies, so let's grab our art supplies out here. And the first thing if you've seen a few of these episodes before, you'll know that one thing I like to do is to gesso the canvas so that I get a nice smooth surface, and that might be particularly helpful today. Although again, if you were a graffiti artist, you're spray painting on walls and all sorts of things, and which are certainly not smooth surfaces. And by the way, I certainly am not trying to condone defacing of public or private property. If the wall belongs to you, go right ahead and do whatever you want to it. If not, don't go spray painting this image or any other images over top of it. Unless it's really, really a absolutely gorgeous image, I guess. And there are, here in Vancouver, there's a public art program, and there's a graffiti management program that actually gives small grants to artists to make murals in locations that often do get a lot of graffiti. And so it's a government, like a city-sponsored way of helping to control graffiti by giving graffiti artists a place to, like an official place to spray, which I'm sure is antithetical to, to graffiti artists who like the danger aspect of it. But again, I think I often find a lot of graffiti really tasteless. Like, just a lot of it is just people actually, like, a lot of graffiti is people's names just spray, kind of done in a very super stylized way on the wall. And I'm sure I'll get lots of flack over it in the comments, but I just, personally, that seems really juvenile. Like, I remember when I was very young, I used to like writing my name on lots of different things, and I've subsequently grown out of that phase. Okay, so I'm also going to do another one here on a much smaller canvas. Just why not, right? So, and this has also been gessoed as well. Okay. Oh, I'll just show here. These are the gloves that I used for spray painting. I was going to throw them out, and I just thought, maybe people are interested to see that spray paint does get on your fingers, and otherwise my hands, like, spray paint is meant to stick to things forever. And when you get it on your hands, it can be there for a couple of days. Like, you could really be scrubbing it, trying to get it off. And the spray paint I used too, just got from Home Depot. These are the cheapest spray paints I could get. I think it's like $6 and $8. They don't have to be particularly special spray paint. You can spend a lot of money on there's like some art supply stores sell really high quality spray paint, because there are plenty of artists who use spray paint in their artwork for legitimate, creative, fine art purposes. And there are people that use spray paint for, redecorating furniture or doing murals for businesses. So it's, Okay, so where do we, so I've sanded down a canvas here, a bunch of canvases. I got another one just wiping off all the excess. There, look at that. And then watch, I don't know if you can, whew, all this dust cloud goes up in the air. So, how about the first one I'm going to do? I'm going to show people how to do this. We're going to draw the image out. So if you don't have if you don't want to print it out and you don't want to make a stencil, then that's fine. I'm going to show you. Let's make a painted version of it right here. So on this smaller canvas. Which one here? Okay. So we've downloaded that image, and let's go down here. Okay. So let's draw this out. As you know, I like to divide the canvas roughly in half. Okay, and then if we look at the image, I would say midway is maybe right around here by her elbow. Okay. Now, let's imagine if this is her elbow. Let's just draw a line here like this. This is an arm. All right, and then that arm attaches to a rectangle, right? And then that attaches to a triangle. And then we've got, let's say, these two triangles down there for legs. Let's attach a triangle down there for 1 foot, a triangle for another foot. Okay, let's do this head. Let's put a circle here. And it doesn't, we can adjust the features here in a second. And here's this ponytail. Okay. And then, let's say this is our hand. And then, probably what I would do next is draw the balloons out. And let me see, do I have a little circular thing around here I could use? Because I can draw circles, but maybe some other people might struggle with that. Where do I have a small circle? I don't seem to have one. Anyway, if you could use this, like, let's say the top of a like a coin would be great if I had a coin around here. But anyway, let's just draw this out. So, and let's put a circle maybe here, and another one here, another one here. Okay, so we draw all this out, and then we're going to connect them with some black lines for the strings, right? Okay, so very simple drawing to kind of get started. Now let's kind of refine it a little bit. So grab an eraser, and what I like to do after I've got a little sketch like this is I'm looking for the side that doesn't have too many, that's like, for instance, if I use this side, it's going to get that mark all over here. So let's go to the cleaner side of this eraser. Oh, look at that. Just, well, I'm using, okay, I just realized I'm using a 5B pencil. Remember, people ask me, what's the difference between a 2B and a HB pencil and an H pencil? This is the difference. So, my goodness, what a mess. So, I might even have to redraw this whole thing. Okay, so what I was going to say is you could erase it lightly, and then there would be the hint of those lines, and then you could redraw them. But, so we've got... Okay, let's start by delicately drawing these balloons back again. And let's see, this is where that hand is going to be. Okay. Okay, so let's paint this painting quickly, and then we will work on the stencil here. So what I need for this painting is black and white, right? This one, we don't need a lot of colors to work on. I'm going to use just my regular black, and I'm going to use my warm red. So let's move this out of the way. Now, having said that, you could be very creative in the way that you, the colors you apply. I'm actually, now I just realized that I actually want to, I'm going to put some white over top of this. Especially because I've made a little bit of a mess here with this image. And I should stop using this 5B pencil. God, I should be using something a little bit like, here's an HB. That would have been smart, Michael. Okay, so I'm going to paint over this whole thing. And don't you love these things? Oh my goodness. I want to, one day, and I'm sure somebody already has come up with something to do with them. I am going to, did I get my brushes out? Okay, so I got my brushes here. I'm just going to put the paint directly onto the canvas here. Okay. And I'm just going to cover this whole image. And this is going to help clean it up significantly. And the other thing here is, if I made some mistake while I'm painting this image, I could then go and touch it up with some white, because the background is also white. So, whereas if I just painted directly onto the canvas, it might kind of, you might be able to see the correction, because the canvas might, it looks white, but it's maybe not the exact same white as the white that you have in your paint set. Okay. So for instance, some of these lines that I had painted originally, if they keep coming through, I can just keep on painting over them and they'll disappear. Okay. So actually, this is going to take a few minutes to dry. So while that dries, let's work on the stencil, and I'll show you how that whole process works. So we'll do a few different things here. And if you're watching this later on, you feel free to skip ahead to wherever you want to watch. I know that some people do that. And I can see in the analytics of the videos where people skip and where they don't, and that's fair. I do the same thing. I scrub through videos all the time when I'm watching them. So let me see. Interesting. I can't. Let me see. I can't see the chat today. Oh, wow, look at all the comments. Sorry, I didn't look. Whoa. Peter says, my dollar store is out of canvas boards. Clearly, everybody here is rushing to the store to buy those supplies. Maybe everyone's taking this class. So, a few things here. One of which is, as a reminder, there is a Facebook page that has that my wife created for this specific, or for our classes, art classes going forward. Maybe I'll just bring that up here to show people. And oh, this is another request. So here's, look at, oh my goodness, people have been posting their images already. This is so exciting. Wow, cool on this. So if you're interested in joining that Facebook group, there's a link in the video description below, and it's a private group just for people taking these classes to share their artwork. It'll also make it a little bit easier for me to find all of your art if people are posting it here for when I do the next session where I celebrate and give feedback on your artwork in late December. So let's get to this here. We're going to make the stencil for it. So while the other painting is drying. Okay. So let's back that back out. So, as I said, I've got these printouts that were on the Dropbox link, which again is below in the video description, and you can download these and print them out. 2 pages. You'll see here, if you're wondering what these things are, we're not going to paint these. These are called registration marks, and that we'll kind of learn what that is as we go here. So, you could potentially cut the stencil right out of this paper and attempt to use it to apply this image onto a canvas. That could work. The thing is you might only be able to get one image out of it, because what's going to happen when you cut this out on photocopy paper and then paint on it is it's going to start wrinkling really quickly, and it's going to drive you absolutely nuts, because again you'll get maybe one image out, and then afterwards you'll probably end up having to throw that stencil out, which can be really frustrating if you this is a relatively complex stencil to cut out, and you'd really rather not have to do it multiple times, right? So how do we get around that? Well, we are going to transfer it onto a big piece of poster board. So this is a piece of poster board from the dollar store. Here, two of these sheets for $1. Right, just so you can see, because sometimes this is what, you know, all sorts of professional artists use for stenciling. I think people think, oh, I need to make it out of cardboard or linoleum or some like really thick material in order to make it work. And, you know, I'm sure if you used a really heavy material, that would make it last even longer, but doing anything with a really thick material like that is really difficult. Like cutting through a thick piece of linoleum or cardboard is tricky. So we're going to use this poster board. Wow, that's casting quite the shadow. Oh, this is all these shadows from all these lights. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trace the shape of the canvas onto this big piece of poster board. Right, I'm going to use my pencil. I get it's kind of centered on here. Ideally, it would be about the same size or even a little bit smaller. Right? So I'm just going to line it up. And then okay, can you see that? Okay. So and I'll just show you too, just in terms of, you can't, ideally we would do 2 side by side, but they don't quite fit. So we're going to do one this way, and then we'll do the other one in the other direction. So let's, actually, we might as well draw them both out right now. So we got one here and here. Okay. So let's cut these out here, because you can't quite see what's happening there. So and you know what? I'm just gonna go So now I've got this sheet here. It's easier than trying to cut one big piece and it's moving all around the place. So, where's this? Oh, I want this one. Okay, there we go. Okay. So we'll just trim this down even further. So, you know, again, whether you're interested in Banksy as an artist or not, what we're really doing is we're using his artwork as an opportunity to learn a little bit about how to make stencils. Because making a stencil, you know, if you want, you could use this same technique to make Christmas cards for all of your friends and family, just by making one stencil that you then use over and over and over again on, you know, hundreds of cards if you like, right? So they don't have to be used for illegal, nefarious purposes such as spray painting on other people's property. You can use it for creating crafts and other kinds of things. Okay, so now I've got these two sheets, right? And they're both the same size as my canvas. Right, so that's also, especially if you're doing graffiti, you know, one of the things, you know, you could see a little mistake here is I end up moving my stencil over a little bit, and here's some of that overspray, right? A little bit of a black line going on the edge. Does it bother me? Not really. But just something to be mindful of, because if I made the stencil the same size as my piece of paper, when I go to, if I was using spray paint, right, what could end up happening is I would get a little black border, which, if you want that to happen, then by all means go for it, right? You could actually cut the edge of the paper out and make it really kind of interesting, and as you hold it down, actually spray paint around the edges. That could be a fun way to use the stencil for not just the center, but the outside image, right? So there's plenty of ways that we can approach this. So how about let's start with the girl, and then we'll do the balloon part secondly. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to line it up onto this page here. Okay. So, and actually, you know what? I'm thinking, if I was really thinking intelligently, what I would do is I would paint my other two canvases white right now, so while I'm doing all of this funny stuff, they could dry. Okay, so let's do that right now. I'm going to put some paint on both of these here. And then let's spread that around. So I should have done this while I was doing the small one. I don't know what I was thinking. So one of these, I might try just to do two different, make multiple copies and show you how we can make multiples using the same stencil. Because I think that's really one of the main reasons. I mean, obviously you'd want to use a stencil if you're using spray paint. That's one of the uses, right? And that's the way Banksy would use the stencil. But there are plenty of other uses for a stencil besides using it for spray paint. And really, most, I think, like fine artists would use it for making multiple copies of the same image that are about as close as possible to one another. Right? So kind of like the poor person's version of like printmaking, right? Okay, so here's another one, and these are, you know, I've applied actually quite a lot of paint on here, so it's going to take that a good 15-20 minutes for that to dry anyway. But I'll be working on the stencil during that time, so there'll be plenty of time for this to dry. And maybe while this is also drying, I'll look at all those comments that were rolling in there. If you're painting and you're spreading this paint around and you just can't seem to get it flat or to get it even because there's so much paint on it, what I would do is literally wipe the paint off on my brush here or on my rag, and then just go back over, and it's sort of like now I'm wiping some paint off here. My goodness, Can you hear that? That's my stomach. I was like, I should have had a snack before we began. I apologize. The microphone is right by my stomach. Okay, so I'll just move these out of the way. So I just have them sitting there on the floor drying. You could set them up anywhere. It's convenient. Let's see, I got my table is a little bit wet. Let's just rub some of this paint. I'm not trying to clean it as much as just spreading that wet paint around, because that's going to really help it speed up the drying process. My hands are nice and dirty. Good. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to transfer this image onto this paper. All right. So there's many different ways to do this. One of which, let me see. Where did I put? Oh. So the kind of arguably the easiest way would be to use carbon paper and use these carbon paper sheets that are in here. I'll just show you what they look like, because I'm not going to use this method, but I did use this when we made the Warhol images. Right, so carbon sheets come like this, and all you would have to do is take one of those carbon sheets out, put it underneath this layer and between these two layers, and then trace, and it will leave an image there. Now, this kind of thing costs like, I don't know, $3 or $4 or $5, $10, depending on where you get them. Most art supply stores should have carbon paper, and again, I show you how to do this in the Warhol episode, so I'm not going to do that again. I think the way that works really well is by just using a pencil. So let's use here, I can use the 5B pencil. Here's a good use for it. Let's give it a little sharpen. Okay. So I'm going to take my 5B pencil. You could use an HB pencil. Maybe I'll do half of it in 5B and half with it in HB, just so you can see. I'm going to just now take it. You see I'm holding the pencil on its side. And I'm just going to rub it around here. Now, you can see it's picking up some of the texture from this self-healing mat. It doesn't matter if some of that texture comes on there. Let's do another one on here. So what I'm doing is these registration marks. Right, I'm just checking to make sure I've got it all. Okay, and then I'm going to come down here. As I'm doing this, I'm also spinning the pencil in my hand, so that this the pencil is dulling or being used evenly. And I'm being kind of generous to go a little bit outside of all these lines. And then I'm also going in a slightly different direction. There we go. Okay, so there's the 5B pencil. And let's use an HB just so we can see the difference. Registration mark down here. Okay. You know, one might think the best, you could use charcoal or Conte to do some of this, but that might actually be too messy. It might actually just cause a big mess when you transfer it onto the other side. Now what I'm doing, and I'm just going to see if you can see here is I'm kind of holding it up to the light in an attempt to make sure that all those lines have transferred properly. That there's not a big thing like I'm missing her legs or something because I haven't put the pencil marks in that area here. Let's see, does that also work this way? I'm kind of casting shadows on it myself, but anyway, okay, so that works pretty well. So, okay. What I'm also going to do here, I'm going to take both of these sheets. I'm going to put them on top of one another. And I'm going to get this all lined up. And I'm going to use, let's say, we're going to use a few different tools just so you can, I'll show you how you can do it. Here's an X-Acto knife. All right. And what I'm just going to do is just take this X-Acto knife and right in the point here in the center where those crosshairs are, I'm going to make just kind of going in, and you could do this with a nail. Let's see, do I have a nail around here I could hammer in? So I'm just going to do another one here, and I'm just trying to make sure I go right down through the layers. Now there's certainly other ways, you know, I actually have registration tabs for actually doing printmaking. So I don't know if it comes up very well, but let's say so for instance this goes through, and you can see here because it's left a mark from here, right? And then here's the result, another little dot. Alright, this is just going to help me line up these two images later on, or the balloon side shortly. So you can see where that little dot is. Okay, let's just continue down here. It might be helpful if you were to put a little bit of tape down to help keep things from moving. Alright, just double check that those dots came through. Good, good. Okay. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this image onto the onto here. And then you can see, look, it's transferred those lines onto background. So I'm also trying to go, especially up here, the outline of the lines. Not one line right down the middle, but the lines on the sides here. So how about we, oops, the other way. Oh. Right, so I'm going on the outside edge. And actually, I usually use a pen. This is working out pretty well with just a pencil. So, you know, now that I know it works out pretty well, one way we could do this would be, let's say, to use a red pencil. This is helpful to, if you use a red pen or red pencil or any color, but I like red because it shows up pretty well. So I know where I've drawn my lines, right? And that I haven't missed anything. Okay. Now, you could, depending on how accurate you want to be, you can really take your time and try to get this perfect. The thing is, I find that, you know, once you start cutting it, you're gonna simplify these lines anyway. So I'm also just gonna go over top of these registration marks. Okay, and so the moment, right, of reveal It's a good idea before you move it away is just to be really sure that you have got everything on there. You don't want to take it away and then realize, oh, I forgot the whatever, the ponytail or the legs. And then if you're going to try to line things up, the registration marks are helpful, but they still might be a little bit of distortion, right? Because it could be really hard to line it back up properly. Okay, so if we're happy with that, that's good. This now, again, if you wanted, you could try cutting that out, or you could throw it away, recycle it, do whatever you want with it. So I've got this image here. Now, what I want to do is I want to get the balloons onto this next piece here. So here's my pin marks, right? And those, all of these points correspond with these dots. Now, you saw in the earlier video where I ended up having to tear the stencil off because it didn't actually match up properly, but let's just assume that they will. Let's see if we can make it work. So, how do I get this to line up here? Well, one of the ways that I will use is, we've made a little hole here, right, when we poked it. Well, actually, sorry, we didn't do it with this one. So I'm just going to take, I can cut through here with the X-Acto knife and take my pencil and just poke it through to get a little bit, right, as you can see, something like that, right? Or if I don't have a knife, although this would be hard to do with the stencil without one, is just holding it here. One thing I do is kind of put both of my fingers on either side. You want to make sure that this is sharp, but not too sharp, so because you can get I have poked a pencil into my skin, and that's not fun. Right, so you've got these little dots, registration marks. And then it's just a matter, so I'll take one that's a little bit sharper, of trying to line this up. Right, and you go, okay, boom. That's lined up right there. Right, I'll show you how I did that again, right? I take the pencil, poke it through, and then I'm holding it here, and then I just try to get the pencil, I'll fold this here, kind of in, I hold it over that point, right, and now I know that this is pretty close, right, so that's in place. But now, of course, it doesn't mean everything's perfect. You could kind of swivel all sorts of here, so let's try this again. I can hold that down. Let's say we'll go down here, and if I poke this through and then I peel the paper back, oh, I was a little bit off, right? It was a little bit, it's hard to see, but I'm gonna move that into place, and you saw things shifted again. It's okay. I move that there. Let's go to the opposing corner here. If I poke this down and I peel that up, boom. Let's see if I can show you. I guess I can't really show you, but they're pretty much lined up. Now, this is also, this is not perfect, but that's pretty darn close. Now, I just I forgot, I haven't done the marks on this side. So how about what I'll do? If I got it lined up, I could just do this. Right? This is the template can get nice and dirty and full of marks and all that kind of stuff. One thing you could do to help yourself line it up again is you could write like that might be one way of doing it. All right, so if this gets moved out of the way, look, I got my lines here, and I can just go, boom, right back to here, line everything up, and I'm ready. Okay, so let's put some, this is my HB pencil. Okay, I'm going to look at this and see Okay, you can see how I've missed the top of here, so let's make that again. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then I'm just checking in the light to see. Yeah, I think actually needs a little bit more right there. Okay, so we'll just line this right back up. Or you saw how I lined up the registration marks. And then let's do the same thing. We're going to go outline it with the red. Okay. And I don't need to do the registration marks here because I kind of have them anyway. So I pull that off. You can see, boom. And again, I don't need that sheet anymore. Now the tricky part is cutting the stencil out. So there's a few different ways to go about this. One way is that you could use a pair of scissors. In fact, maybe I'll show as many different ways to cut out a stencil as I can think of, and maybe that would be helpful for people. So, probably the easiest way would be to use a pair of scissors. Now, there's, let's say, one way to get in there would be to fold the paper like this, and then you can cut it, and then you've got your in here, and then you can dig your. But another way is just to go like this. Is to cut right in, right from an edge. It does maybe affect the integrity of the form a little bit. Right, and we can start cutting this out. Okay, so this is so far one way of doing it. Now, always remember that whatever is inside here is not important. This is going to be where the paint goes, right? Just like this image right here. It kind of looks cool. Maybe you could use it for a collage or something, but it doesn't have too many purposes. Whereas the outside edge is what we're really concerned about. Okay, so let's that's one way of using. We'll go back to scissors. I have X-Acto knife. I also have, let's say, like box cutters. The most important thing is if you're going to use a knife, you want it to be quite sharp, right? So how about I'll show you my own way of dealing with like how to get these to break. Let's say this here. So let's say this one is too dull. Right, what I'm going to do is, let's zoom in. So I want to snap a piece off here. Let's get, actually we could just use these couple pieces of, you know what, let's do this properly. Okay. So I'm going to take like a rag, and it's some kind of a hard surface. Like it probably shouldn't be your kitchen table or linoleum or marble countertop. That's why I like having a self-healing rubber mat like this. If you don't have anything like that, a good alternative is just like a magazine. Right? You can use the cover or inside here. So let's just flip to, look at that cool image. Right? And then I'm just going to kind of put it in here, crack, right, and boom, just like that. So snapped off that little piece. So one reason why I like using a rag is it helps keep this little thing from shooting off onto the other side of the room, and then you're like in a panic thinking, oh my goodness, I can't find the piece, the dog is going to eat it, or my kids are going to stumble on it, or I'm going to step on it in the middle of the night. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we don't want to just throw this into the garbage. I'll show you my little technique for dealing with these things, and maybe you've seen it before, but is I take some tape, and I peel off this tape. I like to just kind of fold a little edge on there just so I can easily find it. Okay, so I got a piece of tape. You can use any kind of tape. Let's get this out of the way. Maybe we need this. So I've got a piece of tape. I take my razor blade, put it in the middle, and then I fold this little package as many times as possible, because this way, you know, it doesn't make a hole in your garbage bag. But if somebody were to be going through your garbage, or an animal, a raccoon were to get into your garbage, and you don't want who or whatever it is to cut themselves on that razor blade. So this way, it helps keep that nice and safe when it goes into the garbage. Or recycling, if you can recycle. I don't know if you can recycle those things. Okay, so let's cut out this stencil now. So, or sorry, we were doing this one. Let's finish one at a time, Michael. Okay, so we don't have to worry about making this perfect either. You can cut it out again with scissors. You can cut it out with a knife like this. You'll also see what I'm doing here. You see how there's parts I'm leaving this edge in? I'm going to leave that into the very end, because especially when there's these little points like this, I want this whole thing to be as kind of the structure of it to keep as stable as possible until the very end when I pop it out. You know, these lines are getting a little bit wider as I go here. See this kind of pulled up a bit? That's okay. Sometimes it gets a little bit confusing in there, so take your time. Okay. Right, so when you've done all that, then you can cut. Oops. And this one I think was a little bit long, so we'll trim that down. Alright, and when that's all done, it should... Well, I guess I still have all this rest of the hand to cut out, so let's do that. What I often like doing if I'm using a knife is to actually use it as like a fulcrum to turn and twist, rather than trying to so it doesn't have to do too much of moving. Let me see. So you could see, this is again just this poster paper, which is maybe like 200 mil. Or what is it? I can't remember what the is it ply? I'm trying to think of the thickness of paper. Like photocopy paper is like 25 ply or whatever they call it, mil, or I don't, it's not millimeters, but anyway. So that's really thin versus poster board is probably 150 to 200 or so, depending on the make. Usually it's on the little bit thinner end if you're getting it at the dollar store, because it's more expensive to make thicker paper. Okay. So once you've got that, you know, there might be a few of these areas where it, you know, you need to kind of go in and just use your knife and kind of pop it out. And then you should just pull right out. If there was, again, a few places where it just wouldn't, you know, you could, it's pulling, is just take your time and just kind of delicately go in there. It really helps. I can't tell you how much easier it is if this is sharp. Actually, when I was doing the other one earlier, I was using this one, and it was a little bit dull. And I did the whole thing, went all the way around, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. And then I tried to pop it out, and it had just barely gone through the other side. I've got to do the whole thing over again, right? So you know, check after you've got a little bit to make sure that it's working properly. Okay. So I'm just gonna. So remember when I began this, I used a pair of scissors to cut in there. So I just want to show you how I could just seal that up with some tape. And if I pull this down, I'm going to cover those feet. So I'm just going to go down here and look, there's just a little bit of a tab of paper. But, you know, these stencils are going to get really, really messy. Don't worry about making a really clean, pretty looking stencil. If anything, they kind of it looks kind of neat when you got a really dirty stencil. And if you do this a whole bunch of times, especially if you use different colors, the stencil itself could potentially be more interesting than the actual art that you use the stencil to create, right? Okay, so let's do one more, cut this other stencil out. This is a little bit trickier cutting circles out, so that's why, and using a mat is really helpful, but again, maybe not everybody has a mat, so I'm just going to use a magazine. But again, the covers are a little bit thicker, so I like, you know, that might work a little bit easier. And then I'm just going to turn the page as I go around here. And take your time while you're doing this, right? If you're using a knife, you know, especially those of you that are younger, please get your parents to help you. Palash, if you're watching, you get your parents to help you use a knife like this. And, you know, and that goes for adults too, is just be careful and keep your eyes on this the entire time, right? You don't want to be watching the latest episode of The Crown while you're doing this and be looking up every once in a while at the latest scandalous thing that has happened. My wife and I are watching The Crown, which I think is pretty good. I think it's like the amount of money they must have spent on each episode must be ridiculous. Although apparently in England they're trying to make Netflix put a disclaimer at the beginning saying that it's all fiction. Okay, so you can see, you know, I'm using, let's say, this cover, and I've cut up the cover pretty good. So if you can imagine if this was your dining room table, your parents or your partner could be very upset with you for. I'm just going to go back to the mat just because it's a little bit easier. But you can see that it can be done with a magazine or newspaper. And again, doing these circles is kind of tricky. You could, but you know, there's no reason why you couldn't just use the stencil for the girl and then just use a brush to do the circles at the very last, right? Because that might actually be kind of fun too. Or you could use a stamp to do that. Right, so now I've got these two here. Nice stencils. Okay, so maybe let's go back to, and let's do this painting we had begun way back when, and let's work on that, and then we'll do the stencil versions afterwards. And I'm just remembering I've got a sponge by the sink that I got to use, but maybe we'll do that when I get to that part there. Okay. So let's get out some black paint. That's going to be the first thing I'm going to use. And I'm going to use red paint as well, but maybe let's just wait until I get to that part before I put it out here so that it's not sitting on my palette drying out. Now, which paintbrush do I want to use? I'm going to use something relatively small, like one of the smaller brushes, and then I can add, you know, I can use a larger brush to do the inside details. Okay. I just see all the comments there. Charmaine saying she forgot to buy the poster paper and print out the image, so she'll do that later. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine some people are just watching today's episode trying to suss out if this is something they really want to do or not. I totally understand. Absolutely. Makes sense. Hopefully, by the end, I'll have kind of convinced you to try something a little bit different. Okay, so here's the image, and here's the drawing I put down on here. So let's, if you want, you could redraw with a pencil some of those lines. I'm just going to go right into here and just start painting. Yeah, I'm not too worried about making it perfect. Right, here's her head. Let me give her a little nose. I'm not using any water whatsoever. Again, I always have to remind people because some people really like pouring the water onto their brush. And that leads to some very thin paint, and often you're having to go over top of lines many times. So let me see. This big ponytail. You know, you could also just do the image transfer right onto the canvas itself, rather than trying to draw it out. That's a whole other, that would have worked really well as well. I just want to show people that you can do this without any, you know, unusual method. Not that using the paper, like, I mean, because I guess there's a lot of people that see the use of printing something out and tracing it onto the canvas as cheating, which is, I mean, you know, they have a whole moral, they go through this moral quandary of, and they feel like they are not doing it honestly. And I think, you know, artists want you to think that, because artists use those tools all the time, and they want you to think that they just created an image on canvas magically through their genius rather than through using those tools that that other people that people believe is taking the easy way out. So I just find it really funny because throughout art history, artists have always used whatever kind of tool is available to help them make their artwork as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible. You know, I mean, and doesn't everybody try to do that in their lives? You know, there's all, you saw at the beginning of the episode, there's all these leaves in our front yard. Would you say the best way to do it is to pick up every single leaf one by hand with white gloves and put them into a like, it'd be ridiculous, right? If there's any way for you to speed up the process and get that over with as quickly as possible, you would do it. I don't know why people have a different opinion when it comes to making art or the way other people make art, but anyway. So oops, okay. Yeah, that's fine. It's a little bit different than Banksy's original drawing, the way that these legs were done, but I kind of like the way it looks for me so far. Maybe I'm going to make this just a bit bigger. Oops. And again, because I've painted white onto the background of the canvas, I can easily touch this up and erase any details I'm not happy with. The next thing is, well, you know what? Since I'm painting this way, I actually can paint the red balloons and then add the strings to them afterwards, unlike using the spray paint. Okay, so let's go here. We're going to add some red paint. We don't need much of it, so I'm just going to put a little blob there. Oops, right here. Can you see that? Right. It's a little bit of paint. And let's draw these circles here. So come back to the original. And you could add more balloons to this painting if you want. You could add or reduce the number. You could change the color. Instead of red balloons, they could be purple balloons or pink balloons, or it could be a kite or a flying dog that she's holding onto. You know, like, use your imagination and have some fun if you want, right? I'm just going to show you how the basic way of doing it, but there's no reason that you can't break the rules. Right? I mean, we're literally painting an artist whose career is about breaking the rules, right? So you have permission to kind of go wild. If on any painting, this is the one where you can kind of break the rules. See, this one will be finished relatively, just a few more minutes. And then we'll go back to the stencils and we'll put some stencils down on here. Now, I'm not going to use spray paint again tonight, because if I went outside, it would be pitch black, even though it's only 5:30 in the afternoon or evening. But you know, we're in December, beginning of December. And the nights are long. So, okay. So I got those balloons painted. Now, where's my little black brush? Let's connect these balloons with some lines. So let's say this is a hand right here. We've got one going here. It can be helpful to kind of, you know, if you imagine, especially when there's lines going. In fact, you know, I can do this, but I can imagine this at this point causing some people a little bit of stress. So let's show you a way that you can do this that causes the least amount of stress. So what I'm going to do is just imagine drawing a line. It goes right through here. I'm actually going to turn this. Right, same thing here. We'll do. See, I'm sort of, I want this line to be continuous. And I think of it as like a golf swing. Right, I'm going to do this line all the way up here. This one connects to here, I guess. Let's do another one up to here. Okay. So now we're just going to paint this in here. Okay. Gotta kind of turn this around to get at everything, but okay. All right, okay. So there's our first version of this painting. Maybe her chin back there. Any more details? Just going to go around and see if there's anything that needs to be. So any places you could see where my original pencil marks were, let's just say let's clean that up right now just so you could see that it can be done. Get a little bit of white on my palette. Where's a brush I can use? Get a little bit of white on my brush, and then there's a lot of pencil or eraser shavings around here. All right, so I can just take this, especially if you got some lines that are really, really dark. Be kind of generous with the paint you put on there. Okay. So again, this is why I put that white paint down first, because if I had just had the raw canvas, these white marks would actually show up quite distinctly. And then what I would end up having to do potentially is actually outline this whole thing with white paint, and it would basically defeat the whole purpose of having made a stencil in the, well, not in this case, but it could really be a really super frustrating little exercise. So the only area where it could make a bit of a difference is if there was a lot of texture on this canvas, like it was not gessoed beforehand, and then I put some white paint on, because right now I've put a lot of layers of white right here, is it could look quite smooth here versus a lot of texture elsewhere. Just something to be mindful of. Okay, so I'm gonna put some of these paint brushes to dry, or to, I gotta clean them, otherwise they're just gonna solidify into a lump. It's good to take a couple of seconds to do a little bit of studio maintenance here. While that's happening, I'll read some comments. Jen says, thank you, Michael, for doing the videos. Thank you, Jen, for watching the videos. It would be quite ridiculous for me to do these if no one watched them, so I appreciate that. Deborah says, graffiti in Brazil is part of their cultural statement. It gives poverty a voice. I was there for a conference once, and the graffiti there was amazing. Yeah, there's definitely some places where, you know, graffiti is considered an art form, right? And, you know, there's some people saying, yeah, graffiti is an art form in North America too. But as I said, the vast majority of graffiti, I think, is unsightly and ugly, and but there are the odd one that makes some stuff that is absolutely gorgeous, like I think Banksy's images are. Kyung Hwa Young says, oh my god, is this live? You are amazing. I love your video. Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Welcome to the show. Subscribe and come and watch all the other ones, and watch the ones that I've already done, right? And join and paint along with me. Let me see. What else here? Irene says, yes, Peter, it's harder to find some canvas boards. I fortunately found an art supply house in a local town that has really great deals on basic supplies. You might check that out as well. And Donna says, haha, Peter, the only store in town 20 kilometers from me ran out, and they special ordered 40 for me. That's really cool. So, yeah, I guess we're creating a run on the canvas board. And it's funny because, you know, honestly, for my own personal practice, if I was making art that I wanted to sell, I probably wouldn't use these cheap $1 canvas boards, because honestly, I have no idea what is inside of here and what this fabric is, and the likelihood that this is archival is zero. I'm sure that this is made with the cheapest materials possible, and it's possible that in a few years it could start bending and warping and yellowing, and, you know, this inside could turn into powder and fall apart. So, you know, it might be worth your while to spend a little more money and get, you know, archival canvas boards from a proper art supply store that could last for a little while. Having said that, you know, some artists will say that the archival aspect of art making is the responsibility of curators and museum owners and collectors of art. I generally kind of err on the side of, well, it's also the artist's responsibility. You know, especially if you're going to be selling art to other people. If you're making it for yourself, then do whatever you want. But if you're going to make something and sell it to somebody, you probably don't want them to come back to you in 10 years and say, yeah, you know that painting I bought for a couple $1,000s off you? It fell apart. The whole thing turned to powder and dust, and, you know, the paint slid off, and it started cracking, all this, like, and they might be a little bit angry with you and might not buy your artwork again in the future. So it sort of makes some sense to make things that last, right? We live in this disposable culture. But again, having that, how many times I'm going to say having said that, qualify everything, is, you know, this is intended to be a beginner's introductory class, and if you're, I think if you're using the cheap materials, cheap paint, cheap canvases, then the stakes are really low. You know, if you spent $1 on this and you're not happy with it, you throw it away. Well, you know, $1 these days, it doesn't go very far, right? It's like maybe 25 minutes in a parking meter downtown, right? So, whereas if you really like it and you're like, wow, I did a great job, well, you know what? I could probably do an even better job a second time and on a nicer canvas or board or something, right? And let's say we're going to do 40 of these paintings. At the very end, maybe you decide, okay, I'm going to take my 5 favorite and redo those 5 paintings. Okay, Blah, 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 Michael. Okay. I am going to take a second here because I got a sponge that I want to use for this next activity. If you got a sponge. So I'm just going to mute my microphone for a second. Okay, there we go. Didn't want you to have to suffer through the crinkling of a microphone going up and down my shirt. So what I've done here is I've got just a cheap sponge. In fact, this sponge I've probably used to clean the sink in the studio many times. So you probably want to get a newer sponge. But I want to show you that you can use the cheapest materials you have around. You could use one that you use for cleaning your toilet with if you like. Because what we're going to use, and you could use a brush for doing this, but I think you might find a sponge is kind of also just a little bit fun and different, and it might give you a little bit more even paint application. Got so many eraser shavings, they're just getting all over the place. It's like glitter or something. My goodness. Okay, so we've got these great stencils that we've made, and I am going to, and we've got our canvas. This one's nice and dry, so this is perfect. Now, we can, yeah, let me show you. Let's line it up. Although with this image is pretty simple, so you don't really need to spend much time lining it up. But if you wanted to, what we could do, and I think you saw that in the video at the very beginning of the episode, is I put some tape on it, right? And then I put on the bottom, and then I put this one on top and lined it up using these, right? And again, I can poke my pencil through and line these 2 points up precisely. But I think I'm just going to go straight ahead and show you that we can be, because I want you to feel a little bit of freedom and not have to worry so much about getting it perfect. Okay, so I got this one, and oops, let's show you here. So I got this stencil here. Yeah, let's put a little bit of tape on it. I'm confident that I can hold my hand and not move it, but I think I'm not sure necessarily everybody's that way. So a little bit of tape just ensures that while you're painting this painting, it's not going to slide. Because the worst thing that could happen is you're in the middle of doing it and your phone rings or it slides, or while you're reaching to get more paint, it moves, and then the stencil kind of slides and smears the paint around. And so let's do this properly. And then you can always cut the corners at home if you like. So I'm just going to get this lined up on here. Okay. Now that's still moving a little bit. So if you feel like this is still, can you see how that kind of wants to shift a bit? If that's still doing that, then I'm going to take some tape and put that up at the top. And I'll just show you my own little trick is I will fold the tape like this. So we've got a little fold on it. That way, when I bring this around, it's going to be really easy for me to peel it off because I've got a little tab there. That's my little painting trick. Okay, so previously, when I did this, I used the spray paint, right? So this was the result when I did one layer of black spray paint, and then I immediately did this over top of it, and you could see some of this black paint came off onto the back side of this red stencil. And that's why I've got this look on here, which I don't mind so much, but it does look a little bit sloppy. And so does it, and again, I said earlier that maybe that's part of the whole graffiti look, but let's say you don't want to go out and buy spray paint. So here's a way of doing it with just the paint that we already have. So we're going to use this black paint here. Now, I'm not going to use water to do this. And this paint has been sitting on the canvas here for about half an hour, so it's going to be already a little bit tacky and starting to dry. So I'm going to use my sponge and get it on here. I might need even a little bit more. I don't want too much paint, because the whole idea is we don't want the paint getting underneath the stencil. So it's like I've got a stamp here. Let's move that out of the way. Eraser shavings. Okay. And this is where it's kind of fun. All of it builds up to this moment of now holding this down. So I can keep my fingers and move them around however I want. And again, now that the stencil is nice and stuck to the canvas, it's not going to move anywhere. We can then take this sponge. And you see how it wants to peel the paper back up, so. Okay. And it's a little bit tricky with this particular image, because maybe these spikes, so you can see how I'm kind of holding down right where those, the spikes are. Or not the spikes, the pointy edges of. Right, okay, let's get a little more. I'm pulling away as I release my fingers there. Okay. Now, this is a little bit trickier right in this area. So I'm going to now peel it off this way so that they're kind of in the same direction. Right, so it's like I'm kind of rocking the sponge in this direction. It looks pretty good. Okay. Let's keep on going. More paint on here. Now I can get into this hand. Oh, see how it wants to lift off? I want to try to keep the paper from lifting off the surface as much as possible. Could you use a brush to do this? Absolutely, you could use a brush. Maybe I'll use a brush the second time I do this. Who knows? We'll see how things go. Although I really enjoy using the sponge, so part of me just wants to keep doing this like this. Okay. And now same sort of thing down here. There's this little tab between the legs. So as I put this down, I'm going to rock the sponge up. And then I'm just going to go and delicately with the sponge now is kind of dry. Most of the paint is on here. And I just want to make sure there's no smears, because I could see a few of those happening, so I'm just making sure I don't have any smearing of paint on the surface. Okay, so now we got this thing. What does it look like? I'll just kind of show you. Can you see from the side like that? That paint like that. Okay. Now, I'm just going to keep on moving forward, but some people may want to actually wash their hands before you start doing this, so that you don't get your fingerprints all over the image, because you might have paint all over your fingers. And look at that. Cool. Now there might be a few places again, like I can see little marks there I'm not super happy with. But all in all, I think that turned out really well. So we're going to peel this off the bottom. Okay. So, this one is certainly a way of getting a little bit sharper lines than using spray paint, because the paint isn't being blown out and that air wants to go somewhere, so sometimes it tries to go underneath the stencil. Okay. Maybe just a quick little aside here. Okay, so let's say you want to use this stencil again, like I'm about to do in a couple seconds here. One thing I'm going to do is I want to try to clean the stencil a little bit off. I don't want to run this underneath the sink, otherwise the paper is going to get all wet and any kind of wrinkling is going to be exasperated. All right, so I'm just trying to wipe as much wet paint off the front, and then I'm taking a look on this side here. And let me move this over here. So I want to take a look at, remember there was a little bit of paint that got underneath here, and it looked like that might have been a piece of paper. So what I'm doing here is just very quickly rubbing along these edges with my finger to kind of smudge out any paint that might be wet. That's going to help it dry just a little bit faster. Because often when you're using a stencil, what ends up happening is the back side starts getting some paint, and then when you put it down, and especially when you're repositioning it, as we're about to do here, that, you know, let's say I got some paint here, all of a sudden it just starts getting all over the face of the other image, and we don't want that. Okay, so again, it's worth just taking a second just to make sure this is nice and clean before we move on. Okay, so let's do this again. We got another canvas. This is what's fun about doing this, is I could do dozens of these right now. Okay, so I'm going to put this tape back there. You know, after maybe 3 or 4 times of doing this, your tape is probably done, and you might need to get some more tape and replace the tape. So let's get this going again. And also, you know, I'm not using water because that water would act just like spray paint and could start bubbling and pooling under the surface, and that can also just be a big mess. Okay, get my sponge nice and ready to go again. You can see now that the paper is warping a little bit, right? So it's because it's absorbing the water from the paint, and it's starting to kind of change a bit. Now, if I could let it dry, or I could press it in between. A good way to do this would be taking some wax paper, put some or parchment paper, which I have over there, and you could put this in between some parchment paper and then put some books on top of it and let it dry overnight, and that would help get rid of some of these wrinkles. But anyway, let's just plow forward here. So I got my sponge. I'm just kind of holding this down to help give it as all right. Okay. Keep on going. So you could imagine this could be really fun to do and start changing the colors. And that's a very Warhol thing, right? Is to just like start making, you could do the same image with white paint on a black background. You could use red paint for the girl and black balloons. I mean, you could just go on and on, you know, really playing around with this image. Okay, I feel like that's pretty good. Let's peel this off. There we go, another one. Okay, set the stencil down. All right, well, you know, again, so actually, you know what, let's just clean the stencil a little bit before we move on. Often you want to geek out on how cool the image looks, but I think so if I wanted to reuse this stencil again and again, I just want to kind of help clean it up a little bit. It's the proper care of these stencils that you'll appreciate later, because, you know, at the time you're like, oh, this is good, I'm done, totally done. And then it's like, maybe you show it to a friend and say, yeah, you know, I can make dozens of copies of them. And like, really? Could you, it would be really cool if you could make one for my daughter for her birthday. That'd be, you know, oh, well, I didn't really take care of that stencil. I just tossed it in the garbage afterwards. Like, oh, why didn't you save it? You could make dozens of these. Whether it's a Banksy image or another image you make of something else entirely, I think it's would be a good idea to preserve these. So actually, do I have my parchment paper handy? Yeah, these are drawing. I am going to get some parchment paper for this and a different sponge, right? So let's mute this audio. Forgot to unmute my microphone. Okay. So, you could just leave it to dry like this, but the more complex the stencil is, the more likely it is to really change shape as the paint dries. So I've got this under here. Then, you know what I'll do? I've got my big, I'll do this on camera rather than off camera. So I got my stack of paintings here. I'm going to be careful because my fingers are all wet with paint, but let's just lift up here. Throw this under here. Boom. Now I can just let that dry. Because there's not a lot of air able to get in and out of there, it could take at least 24 hours for that stencil to dry. Okay, so I've got 2 Banksy images. Irene says, I have to head out. This was a blast. Thank you, Michael. I will post mine the next day or two when it dries fully. Have a great rest of the week, everybody. Thanks, Irene, and enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great weekend. Okay, so both of these are still a little bit wet. So I'm going to wait just a few minutes so I can learn the lesson I learned from my spray paint version. But I think what's just right now quite satisfying is, let's say, it's just looking at these side by side. Like, they are almost completely perfectly identical, right? So this is a cheap and dirty way to make as many images as you possibly want without hiring some company to help make prints for you. And they're on canvas too, which, you know, printing on canvas is a little bit of a tricky way to do, right? So, okay. So, let's try. And then we have this one. It's a little wet in these areas. Now, again, I don't have to wait for this black paint to dry if I wanted to just take my paintbrush and do circles just like I did right here. Right, I could just do that right now if I wanted. Or I could paint, I don't know, a flying balloon elephant, or any type of image. I mean, this could be the bottom of an airplane that she's hanging onto. Or, let's say, just for the sake, I don't have no idea what this image looks like. Here, maybe it looks like she's a tree, and these are roots growing into the ground, and I could actually paint the ground here, and I don't know, an ant hill, like ants going around. I could turn these into an ant structure. Or this could be like she's Wonder Woman, or Supergirl, Superwoman, or I think there's a Superwoman, right? And she's flying through the air and she's shooting some kind of, or web or beam of light out. So, you know, if you're not happy with your image, sometimes just turning it around and seeing what it looks like from a different angle can be really helpful and kind of fun. So, you know what? These are still wet, but I am getting very hungry. So I'm going to, even though I made this mistake once already today, I'm going to make it again. And you'll see that it's not going to be the end of the world. So the first thing is, if I line this right back up, are those balloons going to be in the right place? Looks like. So again, let's say if I... what's the best way to do this? If we're being really, really impatient. You guys have the opportunity to let it dry and then come back tomorrow and work on it some more. I want to finish this all within the shortest amount of time possible. So that looks actually pretty good if I just adhere to my original plan. So again, I could probably use some tape along here. This black paint is still really dry, so what I'm just actually gonna take this, actually a rag, and I'm gonna soak up some of this paint. It's actually much drier than I thought it was. I thought this was it looked quite wet, but it's not. So, okay. Let's get some red on our sponge. Okay. And I'm upside down here. I'm going to turn this the right side up just for video's sake here. Okay. So, I've got a new clean sponge. Get some red on my sponge here. And we're going to replicate that same thing we did before. So part of the reason why I wanted to soak up any of that wet black paint is especially using this technique. If this paint was still really black, and still cross my fingers and it's not going to happen to me yet, that I could end up soaking up black, and then this color could turn into a dark red very quickly. So I think I need a lot. I'm going to put a lot more red paint in there and see if I can hide those black lines a little bit better. The one thing with going so thick with this application is the likelihood of that paint finding its way underneath the stencil is dramatically higher than it otherwise would be. I can also, like, as I'm doing this, I see there's kind of a cool texture that's forming. So this might be something I might need to come back and do another layer on later. So it'll be a little tricky to line that up again, but let's peel it off. Cool. As I said, you could see if I had resisted the urge to go back to it again, I probably would not have this, because you can see underneath here, you see how the paint came out underneath these edges. So maybe let's do it a second time, and I'll show a little bit more restraint. Okay. So, I'm just gonna clean the stencil off a little bit. This is a bit of a problem because all of that, you see how wet this paint is. Maybe, let's see if I put this rag down here. Yeah, I think let's probably make more sense to clean this side off. One thing I learned when I took printmaking classes in art school was the importance of kind of like regularly cleaning your fingers, because your hands get dirty and then those dirty hands transfer onto the final image. And especially, it's okay if you're just doing one layer and you're doing a graffiti piece like this, but if this was something that was, 10 layers of different, we're lining up all these, like, you'd really want to be very careful that you don't, because it could take you weeks to make one print, and then at the very end getting a thumbprint in the middle of it could just be devastating. Okay, so let's try this one more time. I feel a little more confident about how I'm going to line it up this time. Okay, where's my red sponge? Right here. So I'm just going to get some paint back on it. Less so this time, so I can try to avoid getting the paint underneath these edges. And you can see it's really bubbling up. I think that's because I just put way too much paint on it. So it's this paper is behaving as one would expect paper to do when it gets really wet, which is to lose its shape. Okay. Ah! You see it's bled through again. But, because I'm being a little bit sloppy, but okay. Well, let's say that happens to you and it's really upsetting you. Well, we can take our brush and touch it up. Now the texture is sort of changed a little bit because it doesn't have that kind of stamping kind of quality. And these balloons are getting bigger and bigger each time I go over them. But, you know, technically, you know, it sort of depends on how you, like, some people will pay extra money to have their print customized and have the artist's hand go back over top of it. So that might actually make this one more valuable than this one, right? Just because of the fact that I'm touching it up. Now you can see again in both of these, the paint, the black paint is kind of coming back through. So I could wait for this to dry and add another layer. I could add some white into the red paint. There's a lot of different strategies I could do. If it bothers you, I mean, you may look at it and be like, yeah, I don't know, it's fine. I don't know what the big problem is. So it's totally up to you to see how you feel about the work after you finished it. Now let's just, before we wrap up here, I'm going to clean the stencil up again. Why not? I could use it again if I wanted. Okay, I got that side. That side, nice. Okay, let's get some parchment paper. Deborah says, I was able to cut the stencil. I tried to print on paper for acrylic paint, but the paper sort of warped and the black bled through. I look forward to try classes again when things dry. Love this class. This is definitely a different painting technique, but it is paint, right? And so it's, I think, you know, there's probably most people who've taken the class so far won't use a stencil maybe ever again. But for the one or two people that do, because you, as I said, you can use this same technique for making Christmas cards, for making birthday cards, for I actually did something similar where I made my business cards when I was like 20 years old. I did this same thing. A little bit more complicated process, but it worked really well. And I ended up like not giving those cards to very many people because I liked them so much. Okay, let's put this in my stack. Actually, I'm a little afraid my fingers are so dirty, so I should probably stop touching all those paintings and just leave this here and put it under some big heavy library books afterwards. So maybe I will call it, oh, you know, I gotta sign my paintings as I always like to do. So put my name on here. And this is that black 5B, which is going to leave it. I don't want it to smudge on other paintings. So we'll use that HB, right? Because this one might smudge. I don't want that smudging. Okay, there's one. We're going to sign all of them here. So we've made 4 copies of this painting in 3 different ways. Because I want you to see that there's lots of different ways to do the same painting. one that we hand painted from the beginning. I would also really strongly recommend that you do this to your paintings. If you're painting along with me, use your name, not my name. I can tell you a funny story about that. Because, you know, you might think like, oh, I'll remember when I did what's and such, and then 2 or 3 years go by and you're like, was that in this? When did I do those paintings? That's I keep a journal every night, and I have enough trouble remembering what I did like earlier in the day, let alone what I did months ago. So, and then here's the very first one we did with the spray paint. Okay. You know, there's this big torn piece. You can see here's the paper board, cardboard that's underneath there. That doesn't matter. This is the back side of the painting. Who's going to care about that? Okay, so I want to see all these things side by side. Won't have enough room. But, well, maybe I will. Let's move some of this out of the way. So, look at all of these versions here. In a couple of hours, we've learned a whole new way of painting using stencils. Right. Oops, let's move these guys down here. Okay. Right, and they're almost all identical. Right, this is the spray paint version. Here's my two that I used the sponge technique, and here's the one that I just painted eyeballing it. So what's exciting is all of these different versions, or these are 3 different versions, and this is using the exact same version multiple times. So what's kind of fun is I could make thousands of these. Okay, so I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to cover relating to this topic today. I'm sure something will occur to me later on. Okay. As it often does, often I'm laying in bed and I'm like, oh, you know what I forgot? Oh, you know what? I totally said this the wrong way. Well, that's what the next episode is for correcting the mistakes from this episode. Okay, everybody. If you enjoyed this episode, it's the first time you're watching, and you're liking what you see, I would love it if you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you know when the next episode is. Share this with your friends, make a post of it, join the Facebook group. The link is in the very first sentence of the video description below. And there's already lots of people there sharing their artwork. There's a community of people. Hundreds of people are taking these classes. So what's really cool is seeing all the work that you guys produce. If you want to make a small donation, there's the link to the PayPal below. Or if you would prefer to send it in a different way, send me a message through the Facebook group and I'll send you my email. Okay, everybody. In a few days, I just want to see what is it we're doing next episode. Yeah, next episode we are painting Betty Goodwin's self-portrait. So we're going to do a... Betty Goodwin is a famous Canadian painter, and she did a beautiful self-portrait. So we're going to try to do that. We're not going to be using stencils. We're going to go right back to just painting paint on canvas with a brush directly, and that's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be if you haven't painted a face before, this one will give us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about portraiture, which we've done in the past. This is a slightly different type of portrait, though. Okay, everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you in a couple days. Have a great weekend, and yeah, I don't know, take care of yourselves. Oh, it's not sharing that. Oh, interesting. Why does that not want to go here? Save pin. Okay. There we go. Bye-bye, everybody. A slightly delayed goodbye. We'll talk to you soon.